Destiny of a Savior by Famous Fault. Chapter 24. Facing Death. Yugi lowered his arm, his jacket falling to the ground. Snape was dead. The dying words of the man left him and Atem equally confused. He had the vial in one hand, and the blood-soaked jacket covered his other. Looking at the vial, he noticed that the content no longer were tears, but a silvery substance, neither liquid nor gas. Harry had the same flabbergasted expression on his face. Not a single one of them knew how to react. Yugi knew very well that Harry must have hated Snape for what he had done to Dumbledore, but the boy showed no rejoice over the death. Yugi himself knew not what to think. There had been something so desperate about his last words. He was convinced Snape had been referring to Voldemort when he said he had to be vanquished. But why did Harry have to die for that? Yugi wasn't really sure what side Snape was on anymore. He had been talking about helping Harry and killing Voldemort, but also about Harry having to die. It sounded very strange to Yugi. Then a high, cold voice was heard. It took Yugi a while to figure out why the voice was so loud and strange. It was magically intensified, making it sound to all as if he was standing next to them. "You have fought valiantly, but in vain. I do not wish this. Every drop of magical blood spilled is a terrible waste. I, therefore, command my forces to retreat. In their absence, dispose of your dead with dignity. Harry Potter, I now speak directly to you. On this night you have allowed your friends to die for you rather than face me yourself. There is no greater dishonor. Join me in the Forbidden Forest and confront your fate. If you do not do this, I shall kill every last man, woman, and child who tries to conceal you from me." Yugi and Atem listened closely, both with a growing feeling of dread. He looked at Harry, who had an unreadable expression on his face. "Don't listen to him," Ron said and shook his head violently. "It'll be all right," Hermione said wildly. Let's get back to the castle. If he's gone to the forest, we'll need to think of a new plan." Harry did not visibly react on any of their words. "I agree with Miss Granger," Yugi said. "We should go back to the castle." He looked at the vial in his hand before handing it to Harry. "Snape wanted you to see this, and I think it is in your best interest to do so." Harry looked at the vial he suddenly found in his hand. "What did he say to you?" he asked and looked at Yugi. "He asked me to give you this, and to help you." Yugi himself realized how odd it sounded. They all knew Snape had been on Voldemort's side. Harry opened his mouth to say something, to protest or to ask more questions, but he didn't. Instead, he just looked at the vial, his expression still blank. "Let's just go back," Hermione said. She picked up the invisibility cloak and she, Ron, and Harry disappeared underneath it. "I'll take the lead," Atem said, who had taken over for Yugi now that they were heading back into dangerous territory. When no one protested, he smoothly slipped into the tunnel. He could hear the three students follow. When they left the tunnel, at last he found himself at the Whomping Willow. It was a bit odd, but he spent no time dwelling on it. Instead, he continued to the castle after making sure Ron, Hermione, and Harry were still behind him. The castle was eerily silent. It hurt him a bit to see the rubble, the collapsed walls, and the torn portraits. This castle had been Yugi's home, the closest to a home he had for a very long time, and now it had fallen down like everything around them. He led the way to the great hall, knowing not where else to go. It seemed like the most logical place to go to. The doors to the great hall stood ajar, and from far away he could already see that a lot of people had assembled there. The house tables were gone, and the ground was covered with the one thing Atem and Yugi both feared to see: the dead. Ron, Harry, and Hermione discarded the cloak, and Ron quickly dashed forth to make sure his family was okay. Harry walked towards the row of people, his eyes wandering over them, doing the one thing Atem did not dare doing. He heard a cry from Hermione, who had spotted someone she cared for. Atem still did not dare to look at the dead. He did not want to see the chaos that followed battle again. He had seen it twice before. Why did this keep happening? How many battles could he survive? He silently reminded himself that he had neither survived the first nor the second, but yet he was here, witnessing a third. At first, for a very long time, he felt truly like a ghost, dead, but yet forced to witness all these battles. Tori no boku, Yugi said softly. Atem closed his eyes, unable to set foot into the great hall. He did not belong with these people. He opened his eyes and allowed them to wander over the row of dead people. The first two he saw were Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks. The last time he had seen Lupin, they had been overjoyed with the life of their newborn son. Now that child had lost his parents, too young to even get to know them. He allowed his eyes to wander through the hall, taking in all the good and bad. The Weasleys were complete, reuniting with each other, Mrs. Weasley unable to stop hugging them all. She hugged Hermione, equally happy when she saw she was all right. Atem noticed Ginny crying. He stumbled backwards when he saw why. Tracy, Dean, and Luna were lying next to each other, all three of them, dead. Hermione was hugging Ginny tightly and crying herself. Seamus was sitting with a blank expression against the wall, all alone. The first one to catch sight of him was Madame Hooch. "Yugi," she whispered, but noticed her mistake when she saw the red eyes. "Atem," she said instead, and thread forth carefully. She herself had tears in her eyes. Atem just shook his head and backed away further. From inside his mind, he could hear Yugi's heartbroken sobs. Madame Hooch reached out a hand as if to comfort him, but Atem just kept shaking his head violently. Nothing could surpass the feeling of losing Yugi. But it didn't have to. It was bad enough as it was. He turned around away from all the dead and despair and ran up the marble staircase, not going anywhere in particular. First his family and friends in the battle against Zork, then his later friends in the tomb, then Rebecca, and now this battle. Everyone he got to know kept dying, and the fault was his. It didn't matter how often Yugi opposed that thought. Atem could not help but feel it was all his fault. Somewhere he knew he could not be held responsible for the deeds of the Death Eaters, but he should have been able to protect them. These people had saved his life, and he had not been here when they fought for everything they cared for. The curse of eternity. He had always wanted to pass on to the afterlife. Always. Certainly he wanted to stay with Yugi. There was no one in the world he cared for more, but he did not really think he wanted to see more of the world. Once again, the burden of not knowing what was to come weighed him down. He did not want to stay in this world forever. Yugi would die too, eventually. And then only he would be left. What then? So many had died, and the battle wasn't even over yet. No one else would die, not as long as he could help it. He stood up, the resolution visible in his every move. Lucius Malfoy had created a most dangerous enemy to the Dark Lord and his entire army when he had killed the people in the tomb, and they would know it. The massacre in Hogsmeade was nothing to what they would witness soon. Lucius was off limits. So was Bellatrix. Atem knew he would not be able to face those two without feeling an uncontrollable personal hate, but for all the rest of them waited a fury so dark that it would destroy them. The fury he had felt when dueling Weevil was nothing in compare, especially since this rage was completely controlled. He knew exactly what he was doing. The Shadows were a tad disappointed. The only thing they wanted to do was make use of their wielder's rage to go on an insane killing spree, but Atem would not allow it. The first thing he had to do was honor Snape's wish, find some answers on whatever he had meant. Doing so, he had to find Harry, and he had a vague idea that he knew where Harry was. As far as Atem was concerned, there was only one device in the castle able to show Harry what he needed to see, and that device was in the headmaster's office. The statue that guarded the office sprung aside the moment it caught whim of Atem. It did not dare to stand in the way of the furious spirit. No one would dare stand in his way. Harry watched in silence, convinced nothing Snape had left him could be worse than his own thoughts. He had seen the way the spirit had fled the scene, the sight of all the dead becoming too much for him. It had taken Harry hardly a second longer to bolt out of the room. Atem and Harry shared the same sentiment of guilt, although Harry, like Atem, did not realize that the guilt he felt was not righteous. There was only one place he could have gone to, and that was Dumbledore's office. It did not matter that it was the place where the Pensieve was located. He would have gone there nonetheless. He could not bear to be anywhere else. Once there, he dove headfirst into Snape's memories. The fact that Snape's dying wish had been for Harry to see them was just Harry's excuse to flee reality, even if it only was for the short time it would take him to see the memory, or memories, Snape wanted him to see. He landed ungracefully on the sunlit playground where the story of Lily Evans and Severus Snape started. His emotions were oddly dull, as if he could not really feel the aftermath of the lives spilled that night. Before his eyes, Snape's memories recreated the friendship that bloomed between Lily and Snape during their childhood, and how that took an abrupt end when Snape started practicing dark magic and adopted Riddle's prejudice. His emotions weren't any more pronounced when he saw Snape begging for the life of Harry's family, asking Dumbledore to help save them, soon followed by Snape's crushed appearance when it turned out that Lily and James Potter had put their faith in the wrong man. Now Harry understood why Snape had been so desperate to see Sirius suffer in Harry's third year, not only because he had bullied Snape as a child, but also because Snape had believed that Sirius had been the one to betray them. He had believed Sirius was responsible for Lily's death. The closest Harry came to actual emotion was when he heard Snape promise Dumbledore that he would take care of Harry. The emotion was surprise. Snape had certainly succeeded in keeping him from suspecting anything. He was not so surprised when he heard Snape's opinion on him. Then, for the first time, there was a scene that did not concern Lily in one way or another. Snape telling Dumbledore about the blackening mark, a sign Voldemort was returning. Then the scene switched to Snape standing in the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix. "How long has this been going on?" Snape asked.
"Years now,"
Dumbledore said.
"but Lucius has not been aware of it until recently."
"And of what concern is it to us?" Snape asked somewhat coldly.
"I must fill the spot for Professor Binns. I wanted to be a muggle,"
Dumbledore said, and now Harry understood who they were talking about. Snape's expression remained blank.
"You see,"
Dumbledore said,
"our students never have any encounters with muggles. You know just as well as I that several of the students are willing to follow Voldemort in the upcoming war. How much do you know about muggle history, Severus?"
Snape simply shook his head.
"Indeed, no wizard knows any muggle history. It is just as valuable as our history, if not more so. We allow a muggle to teach the students their history. Not only will they learn a valuable lesson, they will also realize that muggles are no different from us."
"And you wanted to be this particular muggle. Why? Is it not better to simply ask the parent of one of the muggle-borns who already know about Hogwarts?" Snape asked.
"This man, Severus, is in grave danger. He is hunting a Death Eater, Lucius Malfoy himself, it seems, and Lucius knows it. The only chance of survival he has is coming to Hogwarts, so who better? We'll save his life and get a teacher at the same time."
"Why would Malfoy even care?" Snape asked, sharing the same skepticism Harry had towards Dumbledore's words. Many muggles have lost family and friends to him.
"The difference is," Dumbledore said with his characteristic twinkle in his eyes, "that this young man is actually succeeding. He keeps coming closer to our world and the Death Eaters. Him entering this world is unavoidable, unless Lucius decides to kill him before that."
"Then what do you want from me?" Snape asked. He did not protest, but the skepticism in his voice was clear.
"I want you to protect him. Make sure Malfoy does not kill him before I get the chance to take him to Hogwarts."
Snape promised. To Harry, the scene seemed oddly misplaced. What did Professor Muto have to do with any of this? It wasn't that it did not interest Harry, but it was odd, nonetheless. The scene changed. Snape and Dumbledore were standing in Dumbledore's office. "You should never have brought him here. He is far too dangerous," Snape said angrily. Dumbledore did not reply at once. He looked thoughtful at the door that led out of his office.
"He is important."
"Important? How?" Snape asked, confused.
"You know that the only one able to vanquish the Dark Lord is the so-called Chosen One. We both know that the prophecy meant Harry Potter. Harry Potter will be the one to vanquish Voldemort, but there is no guarantee that he will be able to do it all the way."
"I don't understand," Snape said.
"Harry will harm the Dark Lord in ways that the Dark Lord himself will not know. Ultimately, this means... Never mind. I have a theory. If everything goes according to plan, my worries are simply foolish, but it is just a theory. If my theory is incorrect, there might come a time when Harry will no longer be able to destroy Voldemort. If that time comes, the only one mightier than Voldemort will be the spirit that inhabits Professor Muto, and he must be the one to beat him."
"You want a muggle to destroy Voldemort?" Snape asked, abashed.
"Poetic, isn't it?"
Dumbledore asked, and his blue eyes looked straight into those of Snape.
"I just hope that it didn't come to that."
"But surely you can beat him?" Snape asked with a frown.
"No, Severus, no. If the time comes that Harry will no longer be able to put an end to Voldemort, then I will not be around either. The only hope then will be Professor Yugi Moto." And if they kill him, you know that spirits are destroyed, regardless of what happens to their hosts.
Snape said and crossed his arms.
In that case, all hope is lost. But I believe it would not be that easy to destroy the being residing inside Professor Ruto, to punish those weak of heart. He's extraordinary. Not to mention, he has already told me that he will protect the students. One could say he is a last resort, if it becomes necessary, therefore he stays.
It took Harry a while to realize that the scene had changed. The setting was the same, but some of the tables and chairs were in pieces. Harry knew when this was. It was when Dumbledore had told him about the prophecy marking him as the only person able to vanquish Voldemort. It had been minutes after Sirius and Rebecca had died, minutes after Harry thought he had seen the last of Yugimoto. So, he left, Snape said, not specifying who he meant. Dumbledore nodded, clearly still exhausted from his previous conversation with Harry.
Yes, and I told Harry about the prophecy.
How did he take it? Snape asked. Dumbledore shook his head, where he sat slumped in his chair.
I don't know.
I told Miss Davis how they could save the spirit, Snape said to Harry's great surprise. Had that been Snape? But why? Dumbledore looked equally surprised.
What?
She told me everything she knew about Professor Muto and his spirit in exchange for the information that was required to save him. I take it they succeeded, Snape said, as if it really wasn't that big a deal.
Yes,
Dumbledore said, still not recovered fully from his surprise.
They were quite successful. Harry's quest to save his godfather was not quite as successful. Had it not been for Professor Muto and his spirit, Harry, Ronald, and Ginny Weasley, Hermione Granger, Neville Longbottom, and Luna Lovegood would all have died.
Snape was not stupid. Who did die?
Sirius.
Dumbledore sighed, and even now, 2 years later, Harry could feel the pain in his chest when the name was mentioned. The expression that went over Snape's face was unreadable. It expressed neither joy nor sorrow.
Sirius and Rebecca Hawkins,
Dumbledore said again. Snape's expression was frighteningly blank. What happened?
Lucius Malfoy killed him,
Dumbledore said, and it was clearly hard on him to say it. Again? Snape said, sounding almost scornful. I take it Professor Muto is leaving.
Yes,
Dumbledore sighed.
He is leaving. I do not know how this war will play out without him, but he is leaving. No one can blame him. He's done more than enough. I really hoped he would protect the students and take some of the responsibility off Harry's shoulders. It was foolish of me.
What happened to Malfoy?
Injured but alive.
Snape looked surprised. I thought they wanted to kill him.
They did.
Dumbledore sighed and seemed to sink even further into the chair. He looked oddly pale.
But they didn't. Couldn't. Shouldn't.
Snape did not understand. Harry could tell. He did. He had been there when Professor Muto explained it to him and Dumbledore. Yugimoto and his spirit do not belong here in this world. Don't you think it might be better that he leaves? Both for us and himself. He's done a lot of unintentional damage, too. Much unintentional damage.
I suppose you are right,
Dumbledore said, too tired to argue.
But he has saved more lives than he has endangered.
We've seen the last of him, Snape said rather forcefully, so let's just forget about him. Harry was almost amused by that statement. Knowing what he knew now, the possibility of ever forgetting Professor Muto and his spirit was equal to 0. Also for Snape. Snape, who was dead. Diving into Snape's memories so short after his death almost made it feel as if Snape had not died at all. An odd deception of the mind. It seemed as if that was the last thought Snape was willing to devote to Professor Yugimoto. The next memory regarded the curse that had been the direct aftermath of the Ring of Marvolo-Gaunt. Harry forgot all about Dumbledore's plans for Professor Muto when he informed Snape about the plans he had for the Potion Master. Harry was perplexed. Dumbledore had asked Snape to kill him. The play on the Astronomy Tower had not been for Snape to spare him, but for Snape to kill him. Everything was so different now. To see it from this perspective changed everything. But he had the odd feeling that the worst was still to come. He was quite right. They were back in Dumbledore's office, the windows dark. Fawkes sat silent and Snape sat quiet as Dumbledore walked around him, talking.
Harry must not know. Not until the last moment. Not until it is necessary, otherwise how could he have the strength to do what must be done?
But what must he do?
That is between Harry and me. Now listen closely, Severus. There will come a time, after my death. Do not argue, do not interrupt. There will come a time when Lord Voldemort will seem to fear for the life of his snake.
For Nagini. Snape looked astonished.
Precisely. If there comes a time when Lord Voldemort stops sending that snake forth to his bidding, but keeps it safe beside him under magical protection, then I think it will be safe to tell Harry.
Tell him what? Dumbledore took a deep breath and closed his eyes.
Tell him that on the night Lord Voldemort tried to kill him, when Lily cast her own life between them as a shield, the killing curse rebounded upon Lord Voldemort, and a fragment of Voldemort's soul was blasted apart from the whole, and latched itself onto the only living soul left in that collapsed building. Part of Lord Voldemort lives inside Harry, and it is that which gives him the power of speech with snakes, and a connection with Lord Voldemort's mind that he has never understood. And while that fragment of soul, unmissed by Voldemort, remains attached to and protected by Harry, Lord Voldemort cannot die.
Harry seemed to be watching the two men from one end of a long tunnel. They were so far away from him, their voices echoing strangely in his ears. This could not be happening. So the boy must die, asked Snape quite calmly.
And Voldemort himself must do it, Severus. That is essential.
Another long silence. Then Snape said,
I thought all those years that we were protecting him for her, for Lily. We have protected him because it has been essential to teach him, to raise him, to let him try his strength,
Dumbledore said, his eyes still tight shut.
Meanwhile, the connection between them grows even stronger, a parasitic growth. Sometimes I have thought he suspects it himself. If I know him, he will have arranged matters so that when he does set out to meet his death, it will truly mean the end of Voldemort.
Dumbledore opened his eyes. Snape looked horrified.
You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment. It seems that way, yes. Is this what you meant when you said there might be a time that Potter no longer will be able to destroy Voldemort?
Snape asked, and now Harry understood what purpose Professor Muto had. He had to die, and Yugi and Atem had to finish the job he started.
Yes. When Harry dies, hopefully he has completed his task. But Voldemort will still be around. Someone needs to end that. It can't be Harry. Of course it can't be the boy, Snape bit at him. He'll be dead! Why is it so important that he dies at Voldemort's hands? My theory, Severus, it will surely not apply if anyone else that Voldemort attempts to take Harry's life. Voldemort must do it. That is absolutely crucial. You'll be dead. Potter will be dead, and Voldemort will still be alive. Yugi is not here. No one left is powerful enough to finish it, Snape yelled angrily. Do you want me to do it?
Snape had been quite sarcastic, but the look on Dumbledore's face betrayed him.
You really do want me to do it? I have considered the possibility that you might be suitable for the task, yes, Dumbledore admitted. I am not nearly strong enough, Snape hissed angrily. You will be, when the time comes, if everything goes according to plan. Plans! Snape bellowed. Theories! What if everything goes wrong? What if your plans fail and your theories are faulty? You'll have to trust me, Severus, Dumbledore said calmly. And trust yourself.
In the next scene, Snape was alone in Dumbledore's office listening to Dumbledore's portrait. It was giving him instructions on what to do. He had to give the Death Eaters the correct information about Harry's move to the Burrow, and he had to plant the idea to use 7 Potters. Snape, although listening, was not really present with his mind.
Severus, are you listening?
The Dumbledore in the portrait asked.
Yes, of course.
Snape answered distracted.
What is on your mind?
He's back.
Yugi returned for your funeral,
Snape stated.
Yes,
was all Dumbledore said, curious as to why that would bother Severus so much.
The first time I saw him, he was in a cheap Muggle inn. I had arrived the first of Malfoy's attempts to kill him earlier that evening. He never noticed. I was amazed. He was nothing like what I expected. So childlike and young. I can't claim that I knew what to expect, but it wasn't that. I felt sorry for him.
Dumbledore's portrait, nor any of the others, said anything. It wasn't really like Severus to talk like that. Of course, it did not take long to sense the darkness around him. I admit that I came to fear him. The more I was in his presence, the more wary I grew of him. Umbridge, the student's odd behavior, everything. He was different. Dark. He fell silent for a second. I just ordered for him and his friend to be killed. It didn't even affect him. He stopped 8 killing curses, fearing it was the natural thing to do. But I don't anymore.
You feel sorry for him,
Dumbledore stated. The more I learn, he returned. He knew what people would think of him, how they would despise and fear him, yet they returned. Rio Bakura, the Carrows almost succeeded in killing him. I was afraid they would. He would have lost everyone.
But they didn't,
Dumbledore said. They didn't, Snape echoed. I suppose you were pleased, now that you know that the one person able to finish Voldemort for good is back.
I can't say I did not enjoy hearing it, even if it was just for my funeral.
Albus, a different portrait said. You put hope in strange places. A teenager and a possessed teacher. You've made a choice that many have. You better make it count. After that last sentence, Harry found himself laying on the floor of the office where the majority of Snape's memories had taken place. So many things had happened in this office, good and bad. It seemed like all the bad news he had ever received had come to him in this place, and for a second, he hated it. It took him a while to notice that he was not alone. It wasn't until someone knelt down at his side and put a gentle hand on his shoulder that he noticed the other person in the room. He shifted and sat up, satisfying the other person who had been looking for a sign of life.
Are you unharmed?
The characteristic voice of Pharaoh Atem asked, worried. I'm fine, Harry said and pulled away, not feeling particularly friendly towards the man of who Dumbledore expected to finish the job should Harry fail. And he had failed. The snake was still alive. He did not realize that he still had no idea what Dumbledore's theory was. All he knew was that he had to die, and the person in front of him would be the one to bring the war to an end and vanquish Voldemort forever. The ancient being in front of him frowned, clearly not believing him, but not protesting either. Harry appreciated it. He noticed he was trembling with that one task ahead of himself. Dying. He realized he had never really thought about death before. He had looked it in the face, but that had always been with the intention to keep on living. How could one in cold blood walk towards their own death? The almost demonic eyes of the spirit were oddly kind, and he reached out a hand to help Harry to his feet. Harry took it, knowing he hardly had the strength to do it himself.
Snape said you had to die,
the spirit whispered. Harry cast down his eyes.
He asked us to help you.
You didn't, Harry said and withdrew his hand.
You are going to give yourself up,
the Pharaoh stated. He did not sound as horrified as most others would have. He sounded understanding.
I take it this is a bit more complicated than just you wanting this particular battle to end.
Harry opened his mouth to come up with some sort of excuse or to lie. Anything but the ancient king silenced him.
You don't have to explain. As long as you say that this is more than foolish heroism, I won't protest or ask anything else. But you should know that even if you die, we'll keep on fighting. It is the only way to destroy Voldemort, Harry said, knowing full well that he had said more than the spirit had asked for. Harry's heart beat faster than it should when he had said those words. He knew he would do it. He would walk to death. But he did not really want to. How could anyone? It's not that bad,
the Pharaoh said after they had been silent a while. What? Harry asked, not following.
Dying, I mean. Hardest is going there. To cold-blooded prepare for your own death. Dying itself is almost enjoyable,
the spirit clarified. Now Harry understood why Snape had asked these two to help him. Snape had known that the Pharaoh had done just that, walked willingly into death. Worse even, the Pharaoh came up with a plan involving his death himself, no one telling him he had to. A completely voluntary sacrifice. Are you certain? Harry asked. He knew it sounded stupid, but he couldn't help it.
Dying itself, I can assure you, is not bad at all. You hardly notice it. For the afterlife, I can't truly say, but the little glimpse I got was certainly pleasant,
the Pharaoh said with a soft smile. So, Lupin and Tonks, Luna and everyone, they are at peace? Harry asked.
Let's hope so,
Atem said.
But I would believe they are. It does, however, not change the fact that it hurts to see them die. Death is always hardest on the living. Naturally, that does not make it any easier for you.
Harry nodded.
I see.
He looked with awe at the door. He would walk out that door and straight into death. He took a deep breath.
If you want, I can come along,
Atem suggested.
just for as far as you want me to.
Harry looked surprised. There was nothing he wanted more. He did not really want to do this alone, but if he faced Ron or Hermione or Ginny, he'd probably lose his resolution. Pharaoh Atem was different. He had walked this walk himself. Harry would never be able to turn back when he knew that the Pharaoh was following him, watching every step he took. Evidently, his surprise showed.
Don't be so surprised. I know what it feels like to do this. I did not have to do this alone. Neither should you.
Atem sighed.
Don't get me wrong. Everyone does the final bit alone.
Dying. Harry sighed.
Those who choose death will die alone. There are those lucky enough to be surrounded by their loved ones when they die. People like you and I aren't among them. All I can offer you is someone to walk part of the line with you. Someone who understands what it feels like.
Please, Harry whispered and looked at the door again, before looking at the spirit. He had never really seen the spirit in this light before. The light that showed what the ancient king in front of him really was. A human being who'd walked down the path that Harry was about to descend with his head held high, to protect those he loved, paying a price higher even than death. Pharaoh Atem had never appeared so normal before, but neither as extraordinary. Luna had once told him that he looked extraordinary normal. At the time, the choice of words had appeared rather odd to him, but now he understood the combination. Knowing that the person in front of him had done that what Harry now knew to be so incredibly hard, made him look oddly, saint-like. Death was hard enough. To sacrifice what the Pharaoh had completely out of own device. No, Harry could not understand.
I'd be honored, Harry Potter,
Atem said, and his red eyes were unnaturally soft.
I believe the honor is all mine,
Harry said, and turned towards the door he dreaded walking out through. Yet he turned the knob, knowing Atem was only a couple of steps behind him, and stepped outside. Despite everything, Draco had fallen asleep. He woke up with his head on his arms, and his partly filled cup was still standing next to him. Someone had draped a blanket over him. How kind. Looking around with sleep-drunken eyes, he saw that the amount of people in the tavern had decreased. Then he noticed what had awoken him. Voldemort's voice said to the village. Magical blood spilled is a terrible waste. I therefore command my forces to retreat. In the absence, dispose of your dead with dignity. Harry Potter, I now speak directly to you. On this night, you have allowed your friends to die for you, rather than face me yourself. That is no greater dishonor. Join me in the Forbidden Forest and confront your fate. If you do not do this, I shall kill every last man, woman, and child who tries to conceal you from me. Everyone in the tavern, student as well as Death Eater, listened closely. Draco knew Potter would go. He had no doubt about it. He tried to read the expressions on the faces of the Death Eaters. Death Eaters that had been shown mercy they did not deserve. Mercy granted by the Spirit and executed by Rio Bakura. Their expressions were unreadable. These Death Eaters had been told, with various degrees of kindness, that their children had decided to stay and fight against the Dark Lord, against their family. They also knew that Voldemort would not care if the children that were killed during the battle were Muggle-born or the children of his servants. Nobody knew if their children were unharmed or among the dead. Draco himself was not sure if his parents were all right. A cold feeling got hold of his heart when he thought about the possibility that his parents could be dead. He had to get out, just for a couple of minutes. He stood up and walked towards the door, but changed his mind. He did not want to see the corpses that were laying in rows on the street. He could not take it. Not again. He turned around. He knew there were multiple exits in the 3 broomsticks, one of them leading to a small alley, where no one normally came since it led to a dead end. He marched over towards the bar, rounded it, and went to the back door. He knew that the space was off limits, but he did not really care. He opened the door, pleased to notice that the smell of death did not reach here. It did not smell particularly pleasant, but it was better than the smell of burnt corpses. He was, however, not alone. Against the wall sat a trembling figure, sobbing silently. Draco recognized him at once. "Are you okay?" he asked, knowing full well it sounded remarkably stupid. He had never been in a position like this, with people like this, in a situation like this. He did not really know what to do, how to act. The figure looked up and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Malfoy. You shouldn't have... You hardly need... It's fine," Malfoy said and sat down next to Bakura. The albino sighed, put his head on his knees, and did a futile attempt at wiping away his tears. "Will he do it?" "What?" Draco asked, not following. "Will Harry give himself up?" Bakura asked again. Draco nodded. "I think so. He hates it when people target his friends. Yes, he will go." Draco was not quite sure how he felt about that. He had always hated Harry, but right now he could not bring himself to. Not anymore. Perhaps he would not grieve like everyone else, but he'd hardly be joyous. "Atem will try to stop him, I think. He never allows such a thing. He never has." Bakura's voice did not seem to be able to carry his words. "I thought it'd get better. I thought I no longer would have to worry when I knew what they were up to. But I'm worried sick." Once again he wiped away his tears. Draco understood how he felt. He too was worried sick. "Why did you not go with him?" "Because I couldn't take it. It's hard enough to see what happens here. Hogwarts. I really hate to see all this death and despair. People losing their loved ones. I want to see happiness, not this sorrow." Rio shook his head. "I'm not very hopeful in battle. I'd be a liability. I know that." "They're not fighting now. The battle is over. Let's go there," Draco said pretty much out of the blue. He too wanted to make sure that his parents weren't among the dead Death Eaters. "No, it is not. Even if Harry dies, do you really think that the rest are just going to give up?" Bakura shook his head. "No, I think that there are at least a few people who'd rather die than bow to that Dark Lord of yours, Atem being one of them. They might be up against a force they can't even begin to comprehend." "You make it sound as if he's immortal," Draco noted. "Far from it," the albino said. "He's already dead. As long as one knows what to do, it's not much harder to get rid of him as from any other person. If he's hit with the killing curse, Yugi will die, and he'll disappear." Draco frowned. He had been told by his father that the Death Eaters had fired 8 killing curses at him, and he had been fine. Draco did, however, not ask. He knew that Bakura probably wouldn't tell him anyway. "Well, I'm going," Malfoy said. He knew very well that he was not at all fine enough to participate in battle. Far from it. But he had been allowed to rest and to calm down. And the albino simply made him feel better, not to mention that he really wanted to know whether his parents weren't harmed. "I'm coming too," Bakura said, although he did not really sound enthusiastic. "Wait a second," Draco said, remembering that the albino was defenseless. He ran into the hogshead and returned with the object he'd been looking for. Aberforth would not be happy it was gone, but Draco did not really care. "Here, just in case." Draco handed the albino a sword. It was as ordinary as any other, but at least it was something. Bakura did not look happy, but he accepted it. "It's heavy," he said, surprised, but held on to it. "You lead the way." Draco took the lead, not minding turning his back on the gullible and kind albino. He was pretty sure that the last person to stab him in the back would be Rio Bakura, Professor Muto's extraordinary friend.